Welcome back to The Circle, the podcast where we go all in on men's work, embodiment practice, and personal growth from our queer perspective. If you haven't already, please be sure to give us a follow, like, review, and subscribe. Today, we're diving into the fire of anger, how it moves through the body, and how men's work can help us use it as a tool for transformation rather than a force of destruction. Tim, are you ready to go all in?
I hope so.
I am. All right.
I
well,
am.
Well, let's go.
Yeah.
So anger is pretty powerful. It's a pretty powerful emotion, pretty primal, and often misunderstood. It can be seen as something to be avoided or controlled, but can we reframe it as something valuable? So, Tim, my first question is, how do you view anger in your work and in your practices?
I believe that anger is an emotion that we all have, which is kind of silly because all emotions are available to all of us. It is part of our human experience, and we've talked about that many times. But anger is interesting because it is really powerful, and we have conceptions around it. And for men, we are allowed to experience anger because its outward expression is very often strong and big and bold and uh, synonymous with kinds of strength and power that we really value in this moment in our life and in our culture. But we also haven't been modeled, many of us, most of us, have not been modeled or modeled healthy, conscious anger and like a process of that, or been given tools or resources to sort of understand this emotion. So, we this week had two circles talking about anger, and many of the men indicated that one of their struggles with anger was a feeling as if they were failing because they were angry. And I was, sort of reflecting back, that might be in large part because we don't have the tools to start to deal with our anger when it is manageable. We kind of only understand anger in its biggest, most vibrant, sort of rageful, sometimes form. And then, of course, from that perspective, anger is entirely bad. And we all sort of agree that it doesn't have a place here, that it shouldn't be here. But when we think of anger as existing on a spectrum like every other emotion, we have been very sad or a little sad. We've been, we all are familiar with so many different kinds of love and the intensity of that love, right? Anger isn't different, but without tools or conversation around it, it can be this thing we only see at like a 9 or a 10. And so from a 9 or a 10, we have like an opinion about it. So I think when we start to connect to anger and the fullness of the experience of anger and the possibility of anger and have tools to meet it, it can actually be a very motivating force. And I've had moments in my life where people have made me angry and I channeled that anger into action in a healthy or fruitful way. And from that, it motivated me to exceed their expectations. And in so doing, I achieved a goal I wanted to achieve, or, things like that. So I think the possibility of anger being a conscious motivating factor exists, but I think we need to have a conversation around our ability to experience this emotion, our recognition that this emotion isn't just rage, and tools to meet it when we start to experience it.
And so, what I heard you say is that anger is a pretty natural emotional response, and it sits on a spectrum. It can range from like mildly irritated to I'm in a full rage. And what we're striving to do through men's work and embodiment practice is to bring a little bit of awareness to when when that emotional response starts to be triggered, right? Like when am I triggered and it's minor irritation versus when am I triggered and it's a full-blown rage? um so I'm curious, like, what are some of the um things that you perceive that can trigger anger in you?
I believe anger is an indication that one of our boundaries is being has been violated or is being violated or on the precipice of being violated. So when I'm having that experience, I start to think about, well, what is happening in this moment? Um, so can you restate your question one more time?
Yeah, so I guess, what can anger signify, right? And like, what are those things? So you just started talking about boundaries. So like,
Right.
a cross boundary can create that emotional response of anger.
So what's interesting is, one of the reasons in men's work we talk about boundaries and edges is understanding our capacity, what we're willing to accept, what we're not. But we often don't know that. So with anger, I think a lot of people can have and have had the experience of, I'm feeling really angry and I'm not even entirely sure why. I think when we do this exploration, we can start to recognize, oh, I'm feeling angry about a situation or a person or a something. And I can inquire, okay, well, like what is happening? And there's real power in, oh, that person is on the precipice of crossing a boundary, or they are pushing my limit to the place where I may not be able to like maintain my composure. What if I were aware enough to notice that and then take conscious action in that moment instead of waiting until they have fully pushed me over, which they may or may not intend to do, and then I am in full reaction where everything is red and intense, when it may be the case that they didn't do it on purpose and they didn't realize they were crossing a boundary because I wasn't aware that it existed.
Right? And being able to have the awareness to then be able to work with it to say like, okay, hey, there's a boundary right here, and I'm starting to get a little flared. I'm starting to feel maybe a little bit of heat in my body. Like
Mhm.
I experience anger as a very fiery emotion.
Mhm.
So I start to experience heat. I start to like really like I can feel my blood pressure rising. So like just being aware of those bodily sensations, that somatic experience that's happening inside of my body, like can give me enough of a little bit of a pause to be like, okay, like what's happening here? Is it a boundary? Is it another suppressed emotion? Could it be an injustice that I'm feeling, a betrayal? Maybe there's a frustration or a powerlessness that I'm experiencing. Like, what is happening in my field right now that is causing my body to start like to feel this way?
I love that you said that because this is why embodiment practice, yogic practice is so important. It creates a dialogue with our body to get the signals. And anger, those signals tend to be pretty big. I'm red in the face, I'm hot, I'm agitated. I Some people, me in particular, I feel like a digestive sort of stomachy kind of experience when I'm having anger. And so if we can tap into that, we can start to, oh wait, I'm starting to feel this thing. Can I take a look? Can I start to become curious about why am I starting to feel this agitation or this heat? So our ability to reconnect to our own body and our sensations can be an indication that I am nearing anger without being overcome by it.
Yeah, something has like tripped the wire, right? And has caused this sensation to happen inside of my body. And now it's like, okay, like, before I let the entire thing explode, like, can I go in and like, like identify what it is and kind of like prevent the full destructive force from being unleashed?
Right, and what's important to remember is that anger and full rage or full protective, um, engagement isn't always bad.
Mhm.
So I wanted to bring this. There's the teaching in yoga of ahimsa, non-harming, as I understand it, is to cause the least amount of harm possible whenever possible. And, a yogi will work hard to consider that in as many ways as they can. That could mean physically attacking, restraining, or potentially even murdering, a gunman who is capable in that moment of mowing down, any number of people. Now, I suspect any yogi, myself included, would prefer not to take that action if they could. But in that moment, some righteous or justifiable anger would be fuel in service to a higher good, right? So when we think about anger, I don't want us to think about anger as a bad thing. I want us to think about it as a thing that needs to be respected, understood, and worked with. And I think the example I used last night, which I really like, I just made it up, by the way, but no one's mad that the stove is hot, that it's either electric heat or flame. No one's mad about that. But we all understand, oh, this has a purpose and a place in here, but it demands our attention. And, even, you know, regular cooks and parents who do this all the time remember I have to be mindful. I have to watch where I'm putting my hands. I have to watch that part of the pot if it might be hot. I have to be mindful of these things. I think anger is the same. I'm not mad at anger in the way that I'm not mad at the stove, but I have to use it mindfully. And then, with the stove, we have understandings. Well, where do I put the pot handle? You remember that like thing for
Mhm.
kids, like the pot handle should be away so they can't grab it and all this stuff. We need a same set of tools to approach and work with anger, because anger isn't going anywhere.
Yeah, I love that analogy so much because it's like I don't when I'm cooking, like I'm not ignoring the flame, right? Like I'm very aware that the flame exists and then I leverage it to accomplish what I'm trying to accomplish,
I
right?
would
Like,
argue you're even grateful
yeah,
that it's there because of what you're trying to accomplish
absolutely.
when placed consciously. Yes.
Hmm.
So
Right.
exactly.
Right. But not ignoring it, right? Like even if I've gotten burnt before by my stove, I do not ignore the heat of that stove. I might get a little uh unconscious of it and I may be a little, in my own world or, somewhere else and I'm not thinking about it and I get a little bit forgetful of it or I'm just like not paying full attention and then I might get a little burn. Like I might like, you know, grab the handle of that pot and be like, "Oh, that's hot. I forgot." Right? Because I wasn't bringing my awareness to it. But, not ignoring it, not pretending like it doesn't exist. It's there and it's serving a purpose.
Well, and the nature of this particular emotion is that it will immediately remind you. So you grab the pot, you were a little distracted, and you will be reminded immediately. Anger is big and powerful and has a tendency to remind us quickly when we become unconscious of it. I think that feels true in my observation and personal
Yeah,
experience.
I want to go back to the example you gave of the active shooter, right? And
Mm,
using conscious rage to take action. And so I think it's a very scary example, but I actually think that it's a good example to work through because it can help us to identify some of the things in which anger can signal. So I start to think of anger can signal an unmet need. So in that case, I have an unmet need for safety,
mhm,
right? So all of a sudden triggered, right? I've got this thing that's inside of me that's alive. I also think of, if that gunman is coming in, I think that it's an injustice. It's a betrayal. It's a betrayal of our shared understanding of common spaces and how we, are going to interact as a society and the politeness and the way that we should
mhm.
treat people. So all of a sudden
Respect for life.
the
Yeah.
respect for life. So now all of a sudden I'm reacting to that. My anger is signaling that there is a misalignment of my values,
Mhm,
right, with theirs.
mhm.
And so I think it actually like starts to help us in an extreme example understand, some of the things that can, have an angry response. Mhm.
Right, and it is an intense example, but it allows us to understand that even anger at a 10 isn't necessarily bad. So I get nervous about people putting value judgments on emotions at certain, like, intensities, but rather think about them, in the context and with conscious, awareness and application. So, uh, it may be the case that anger at a 10 only has a very few specific circumstances in which it is appropriate, but it still has some. There is no "that's all bad" when we think about the emotional human experience that we're all talking about here.
There are some times, though, that I've experienced in my life growing up, like I was a very reactive, emotionally unregulated child. My emotions were very large. And so, what maybe would have been a minor irritant or a one or a two on the anger scale to some children was a full 10 for me.
Mhm.
Right. And so, I think trying to find ways in which to kind of bring that down a little bit, bring that dial down so that my reaction isn't as large, and so that I can, you know, understand what a 10 looks like and when it might be appropriate to go to that 10
Mhm.
versus how do I kind of regulate myself a little bit more so that the minor infractions don't become a 10.
Well, this is why we need people who can model it and to give us tools, because the child needs guidance, they need communication, they need tools, they need to understand boundaries. And but it is not the child's, responsibility, as far as I understand it, to be able to figure that out in that moment. "Oh, I'm irrationally angry right now, and now I need to, engage my own tools." No, the child needs a guardian to help them understand what their experience is, and I think most of us didn't have that. So, first and foremost, the child that you described, your young self, like, dear young Eric, right?
Mhm.
Um, uh, wasn't doing anything wrong, was trying to figure out their experience and was needing guidance in that. And that guidance could be stern, if it needs to be from a guardian, but context around anger is okay, but this is too much. Like, these feelings are valid. Like, here's some stuff we can do. Um, and that's why we're having the conversation. So now, because everybody in the circle last night and the night before uh, agreed that they didn't have a really healthy model of anger, and they weren't taught tools to navigate it. Every single person in the circle in the last 2 days. Now, this is a small sample, but everyone agreed. So that leads me to believe, and based on other observations that I've had in working with lots of men in different ways, I do not believe most of us have had that modeled. And so, how do we learn it?
Well, I'm curious. Like, I have a pretty clear understanding from my own experiences and my own family, right? Like, what uncontrolled anger looks like, or
Mhm.
unconscious anger, right? Like me myself as a an unrational kid, like going with big reactions. My father is a very angry person, self claimed. Like that is one of his crutches. He loves to use it. Like, I'm angry because my father was angry. So it's like, okay, great, cool.
But also,
So
like,
like
lets
I've
them off the hook.
Right. So I've
Yeah.
I've seen lots of modeled, you know, unconscious anger, but I'm curious, like, what does the conscious use of anger look like? Like,
Mm.
like if you were to model that for me, what would it look like?
Well, I feel like I have modeled it for you. I can't remember when this was, but we were recording an episode, and we were uh, in a different understanding of what we were talking about, and I got angry, right? But what did I do? I paused, I stood up, I shook, I said, "I think we need to take a break." I stepped away, right? Uh, that's one example, and I'm not even gonna suggest that that was the best way. Maybe there were even better ways to do it. But I've had teachers of mine, my teacher, Amir Khaligi, I was in a retreat, we were gonna go into a sweat lodge. And I had this image of what this sweat lodge was gonna be, and I thought it was gonna be like a big sauna. And I was like, "It's gonna be hot, and I don't like it when it's hot, but I can deal with hot." And then I get there, and we were all like all these men that I've been training with, we're all in, like, our bathing suits, sort of ready to go in, and I see this hut. I know it's not a hut. I don't, it's the lodge, and it's like 4 feet tall and completely dark. And I'm like, wait. So I start looking. I'm like, are there stairs? Do we go down? Like, is this a stairwell down? It turns out no. It is not a stairwell down. It is a very short, very cramped space into which lots of men wearing almost no clothes, come in, and then some guy, hopefully you trust him, starts pitchforking in fired lava rock to heat this room really intensely. And then when that's all done, they close the door and it's pitch black.
Oh my gosh.
And my claustrophobia, what I was like, and I went in and I was like, I was sitting next to a mirror. A mirror was like, come sit next to me. This will be fine. And then at one point I'm like, I can't do this. Anyway, long story short, I left and then felt like a failure and was out there so mad. And I was like, I'm going to fucking leave. Like, fuck this shit. Like, someone should have told me this, blah, 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 clearly in a full trigger. And then a friend of mine came out and talked to me, and I was like, I'm leaving. I'm done. I'm like, fuck this. I hate, and then finally Amir came out, and I was like, I need to talk to you. And he was like, okay. And we went into his room, and he was steady enough to take me through a process that included me grabbing a pillow and screaming and like punching and moving this energy through me. And then I really like telling the story because I had that moment and I was like, I'm like, okay, I wasn't fully calmed, but I'm like, okay, enough to leave the room and say, okay, I'm not leaving. I can do this. And then the next day, so many things happened that like allowed for like healing and transformation. But it was because he was able to stand there with me, see me like raging at him. Be like, you should have fucking told me this, like this was your responsibility, blah, 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 blah. And of course I'm like raging at him because he's every man that never told me all the things I needed to know, right? And he was able to hold it, breathe with me, lead me through a thing and move the charge. And from that, I stayed and then had transformational healing. So I think when we think about dealing with anger, well, can you have a person who can watch the storm happen and stay and not, he didn't storm back at me. He didn't match me with, and I wasn't attacking him in the sense of like, I wasn't criticizing him. I was kind of expressing my own, but he was a steady force. That I think we all need that, and we need space to recognize that that's helpful. We need the space to recognize the extent to which we can do that, and we also need space to recognize that in our attempt to do that, we may fail.
And thank you for sharing that example and walking us through it. I mean, like being in that moment, like it sounds like to me that there was almost a betrayal, right? Like you walked into a situation and either were expecting something or like, there was, I think you said it like, you should have told me, right? We should have been aware of what we were walking into because
up until 5 minutes before that happened, I had no clue that my claustrophobia was about to be triggered.
Yeah.
It just never, I thought, oh, I'm gonna have to sit through the heat and like kind of breathe and like manage that. Because I'm like a very fiery person. I'm like, that's going to be hard for me. Claustrophobia was never on my radar. And then suddenly it was like front and center. Like you are going to be trapped in a dark space with like lava rocks.
Yeah. Like I could trust the situation that I had presented in my head. Right. However, right. Like you are presenting a new vision for me that I do not trust. There is now a betrayal, right? Like this was not what I signed up for.
To be clear, by the way, I want to go a little deeper into the details. The lava rocks existed in the center of this round sort of like low yurt, right? And I think there was like a little row of rocks, I can't quite remember, into which these rocks were, but I'm like, oh, if I had been at a different part of the circle and it was pitch black, I could have inadvertently crawled over like lava rocks that had just been fired. I mean, it was kind of a really like a legitimately scary position, even if you don't have claustrophobia.
Yeah, no, and I'm tracking this because it's like there's so many things that you stand for, right? You stand for safety, of bringing people into awareness of the experience that they may be going through, and like by you seeing that situation, be like, this is actually unsafe. This could potentially be very dangerous. That's a value of yours, and this entire experience pushed you to that edge, that boundary of like, I do not agree that spaces should be unsafe. And to me, the space is unsafe. So I'm feeling anger towards it and also claustrophobia and also, right?
Yeah, and you're describing it very well. I will say in generosity to my teacher and the experience that he's creating, if claustrophobia isn't a thing, it may not register and you might need someone to bring it to your awareness. So I can understand how a very well-intentioned person could think we're just going to go in here and like do the spiritual practice, and they're not thinking, well, what if I have to crawl out of here and will I burn myself on volcanic rock, in the process, because that isn't a fear he's got. It's not on his radar. So I want to be really generous about that. I was angry, I think justifiably so, and I think that he heard me when I expressed it. Um, but I just want to be clear. I still think he was doing his best to create a safe
Yeah, yeah.
container.
And
Yeah, yeah,
this is not a jab
yeah.
at that. I'm valid. I want to validate that like the emotion, the anger, super justified by saying there are these things that what I'm hearing, right, are certain things that you hold dear, right, that were not like respected in a way, right? And
Well,
it may not have anything to do with him, right? Like
yeah.
his, right? This is just like this is your experience, and
Well, this is the importance, I think, of like understanding our edges, our boundaries, our capacities, uh, and how we can utilize it. Because I wasn't aware until that moment. Oh, I really value the ability to leave whenever I need to. In that moment, it became clear. Oh, I don't feel like I can leave if I need to, and now I have an experience of that. And in this moment, my experience was fear and anger.
yeah, yeah. And both of those things are survival mechanisms, right? And
Oh
I
yeah.
think like that's a lot of what we're talking about is like it's how do we recognize when something is triggering or like starting to encroach upon our like survival instincts, right? And we meet it with anger as a signal to ourselves to be like, hey, I don't like that. Like something about that doesn't align with who I am,
Mhm.
right? And then from there, what conscious action can I take?
Right. And so, just to complete the story then, because I think it's relevant now that what you after what you just said, the agreement the next day was that I was gonna go back and do it again. But I had spoken about my need for a certain amount of control in order to feel safe. So I was going to be the man pitchforking the stones and then that meant that I could be right by the door. And then if I needed to, I had agency to open the door and pop out if I needed. Whereas where I was the first night, I was a few men down, and it would have meant crawling in the dark over their laps. Now, and where I was seated, to be clear, there was no threat of me crawling on the rock, but if I had been in a different place, there might have been. And so that was the arrangement, and I was gonna go ahead and do it. I did the training, to put the
Mhm.
rocks in because you have to be careful,
Yeah, I mean that's
these are lava rocks that we just took out of the fire. And then later in that experience, I learned that there was another man who was gonna do it, who had arguably equal or greater claustrophobia than I have. And because of all the work that we had done, I said to Amir, I said, I think the best course right now is to let him do it. And so I approached him, talked to him about it. He agreed, and I think the greatest good was served. So 2 days later, I felt like an enormous amount of growth and transformation had happened, but in part because anger came up and I had someone who was capable of holding it and allowing me to work through it.
and modeling like how to work with somebody through that intense emotion. And so
Because
now
wait, before you go on, because I know you're about to, just because anger could have made me leave, but I know I would have had a feeling about that. There would have been a part of me that would have felt justified in leaving because I was justifiably angry. There would have been another part of me that had felt like I quit, or I would have maybe shame and all this other stuff. The process of being able to be as angry as I was and then have a conscious practice to work through it, I think was the thing that got me to that place that felt really good. If I had gotten into a car, which I could have done, and left, I would have felt justified. I also know I would not have felt as good as I ended up feeling.
And being able to sit with it and work through it and allow it to be discharged through you and then channeled into a, a learning opportunity and an opportunity for growth.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Beautiful. And so like with a lot of this work, it really is kind of like you teach me, I teach somebody else, right? It's kind of like the lineage aspect of it of like you were modeled something and now you have the opportunity to now model that. So I'm now curious, if a man came to one of your circles struggling with explosive or repressed anger, where would you start in helping to work with it?
I would need a more specific question because I suspect lots of men come to circles, mine or others, and they are struggling with anger. So, are you asking me about someone is getting explosively angry in circle, or they are coming to circle to help work on their anger?
Okay, let's start with let's let's break this down then.
Yeah.
So let's say it's a personal one-on-one coaching client who's
Mhm.
specifically coming to you because, hey, I've recognized that I have some tendencies towards explosive anger. I may have some repressed anger. Like I want to work with you. Where do we
Mm.
start?
I would start by becoming curious about how, like, where they start to feel anger and how. What makes you angry? What and start to look for patterns. Typically, um, I can get angry. This is an example in the circle, like, oh, someone cuts me off in traffic. I can get angry about that. But is it a pattern of mine? A lot of the men in the circle, it is a pattern of theirs. And I'm not, me personally, Tim, I am not quick to road rage. It doesn't seem very like fruitful or, you know, useful in any way. Doesn't bother me super, like a lot. Um, so what creates anger in you repetitively over and over and over again? Where do you find it? And then how do you experience it? So step 1 would be recognizing, "Oh, I get angry every time someone speaks to me this way." And once we start to identify those things, you can say, "Okay, well, what I'm hearing is that you get angry a lot when someone speaks to you in a particular way." And then we start to go the next level. Like, well, what's underneath that? And what's underneath that is, are you feeling disrespected? Are you feeling unheard? Are you feeling unseen? And we start going to the root. And, with the yogic practice, my teachers always said yoga is a radical practice because we are looking for the root. We're looking for the root of what's happening and to address the root. And this is the same idea. So you might think, I don't like it when people talk to me in a certain way. Chances are that's not the root. And the root is, oh, you feel disrespected or you feel unheard or you feel, mistreated, whatever the thing is.
An
And
unmet need.
yeah, and then we start to get deeper and deeper. Oh, what's that thing? Okay. And when we have a sense of what that thing is and how it occurs in our body, then we can start to first look at it and recognize it, but then also start to work with that. So when that happens, here's this tool or practice or this tool or practice that you can start to work with because it doesn't mean it's going to stop annoying you, bothering you. Like
But can we
you,
take that?
right. You don't have to be a reaction to
Right.
it.
Right. Like I go back to like me as a child, like, can I take that 10 down to a 2? Right. So
Well, I mean,
like the thing is still gonna happen that is going to like like create some anger inside of me, right? There's gonna be an anger reaction, right? But like instead of that thing, let's just take, somebody cuts me off in traffic. Instead of me going all the way to a 10,
mhm.
how can I next time it happens, maybe go to a 2?
Yeah, but that's really generous. I think we are saying if you're at a 10, can I get you to an 8?
Mm.
And just that space, you might be able to think about, well, what is the consequence of that thing I want to do so badly. I want to scream at you. I want to lay on my horn. I want to um, block you on something, uh, and that space allows you to be like, do I really want to do that? Even the space to be like, should I put my phone down and go like lay down for a minute, put some music on? So yes, ideally 10 to 2. I love that. Like also smart driving, right?
Yeah,
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 yeah. Um,
yeah.
but I think initially reducing it any amount to create a little bit of space will help most of us not make a rash decision that we will then regret.
Thank you. I think that's really valuable to like, start to like start there and like working your way down the ladder, so to speak. At the next part of the question, what happens, if there's somebody that comes to Circle that has an experience similar to the one that you had? Like, how do you think you would handle that today?
If a person came and had an experience
Similar to the
similar
one
to the
you
one that I
had?
had with a mirror, I would hopefully meet them in the way that he met me. Deep presence, groundedness, curiosity, allowance. So to start with this, like Amir never once indicated that my emotions weren't welcome.
Right.
And he never said, I don't remember if he was like, your anger is welcome here. It's allowed. But I felt that. So I'm like, okay, I think I would meet it with those things.
Powerful, like the allowance of it, the recognition of it. We're not going to ignore this. We're not going to try to suppress this. We're going to try to move it. But it is welcome here.
I will say, and that it's the moving of it that I think is so powerful for men. Uh, and I talked about this, there is a physiological cascade of things that happen when we start to experience emotions and anger. Like our nervous system and our endocrine system start to prepare us in different ways. And the moving of it is so important with movement, with breath. It's why we feel better when we box, which I want you to talk about in a second, or do a killer workout or take a long walk or, any number of things. I was in a retreat where another man got triggered, and the response was some version of sacred combat. He was given the opportunity to like push up and like exert force against a person who was exerting force back and working through that emotion in this safe way to move it. And then from that moving of it, enough space had been created that he was able to step into a powerful choice. I don't want to go deeper into the details about that, but that ability to move it in a safe, conscious way allowed for a powerful choice that served the greatest good for all. And that, I think, is what we're going for.
Allowance, movement, not repression, not ignoring. It's part of why I box. And that I've shared this in both circles, that one of the practices that I have found most useful in my conscious channeling of aggression and anger is boxing.
Mm.
And I do it in a way that like I'm creating a safe container for myself to be able to mm, like play with those emotions in a way, right? Like I'm not going boxing because I'm currently angry. I go boxing and I set myself up a container. My total workout is 12 rounds with 3 rounds of boxing in each of those. So 12 sets, 3 reps. I don't know. So it's
12 rounds,
yeah. So there's 12 rounds of boxing, and then there's 3 rounds.
sets in each round.
Sure. Y'all,
Okay.
I'm
Okay.
as you can clearly tell, like I'm not the one to talk fitness. Like I know the math, but I don't know the names and I
Okay.
don't know the things. I have the whole thing is 12, and then each of those 12 is 3.
Got it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we'll say each round
Yeah.
has 3 sets
Yeah.
and you do 12 rounds.
Yes.
12 rounds.
Altogether, yes.
Yeah. So 36 sets.
Yes.
Got it.
Yeah.
And how long is the set?
a minute.
And what do you do in that minute?
So it's different boxing combinations, jab cross, hook, and they build in progression. So what happens is the first round is usually one to two punches, and then the second round will incorporate one to two more,
When
and
you
then
say you like kinds of punch,
yeah,
so jab, cross,
and
you
then a
know,
hook, and then an uppercut.
yeah.
So and then different places where it may be like a body or a head. So different areas that they could be placed. And so what that progression allows though is that again, I'm not going into boxing to say I need to move energy because I'm angry, right? It's like I'm going to create a container in which my aggression can slowly build. And so then through that, like as I'm starting to like move my body in a way that is like really forceful, like the natural like heat starts to rise.
Mhm.
There may be a memory that pops up. There may be something that pops up that allows me to start to like build up that intensity. That aggression starts to build, that anger can start to build. And then I have that set time, that time container where I can go there and then I come down. And then I go there and then I come down.
So you're working with it as if you're in a workshop.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think that's what a lot of the practice we do is that very thing. I put myself in a safe place with structure so that I can relax into that. And I think the time structure that you just mentioned allows you to ramp up and ramp down without you, and then you start to experience, well, what does it feel like to be connected in this way at a 6 and then a 7 and then an 8.
Right.
And so the more you do that, the more you're going to be able to move through your life and realize, let's say something happens fast. You're like, "Oh, I immediately went to an 8." Well, without any context, you're you're kind of at the whim, right? But with what you're describing and what we do in embodiment work and yogic practice is, "Oh, I went from 0 to an 8 fast." And I have a sense of how I am at an 8 and what happens if 8 turns to 9. So I can start to make some choices immediately so that I can be the most conscious person I can be. And with me, that's still probably very red-faced and very passionate, but it's controlled or conscious.
And like I can go as I'm building up, I start to understand where also that that line exists where I go into red rage, where I go into destructive anger.
Mm,
And I can start to become very aware of that. And if I do allow myself to cross over that, if I'm in a flurry, I'm like round 8 and I am just like feeling it and something has unlocked and I am just like going to town on that bag and I'm like, rah, right? Like coming back down, like coming
mhm,
back to myself allows me then, if in the real world something does bring me up, I know that I can come down, right? I can go there and then like, like I can just kind of like bring myself back. I can come back down to ease. We just talked with Julian about this,
mm,
right? Of like coming back to ourselves.
mhm. Yeah,
Right?
yeah. I think that is an unbelievably valuable skill that most of us need to bring awareness to and increased practice and to have a community where we can talk about that. Because in the practicing of it, as in the practice of anything, we are going to fail. That's the idea of why we practice. You're like, can I test the limit, see if I can do it? Oh, I got it wrong. I got it wrong. Oh, now I got it right. You know that idea. And so, can we engage in that with this emotion that sometimes feels like we have limited permission, and if we get it wrong, we can immediately feel like a failure. So what if you didn't? What if I could talk to someone who was also on their journey of deepening their understanding and engagement with anger, and I could get their reflection without me thinking, well, if I tell them that I messed up, what if I told them I got a little unskillful in that moment? They're going to think I'm a whatever and everything's going to crumble. And instead, oh no, here's a man where I can say, I was doing pretty well. And then this happened and I got too sharp with my kids or with this colleague or whatever the thing, um, because that's the moment of growth. Oh, so what I heard was,
Mhm.
what could you do next time? And we're suddenly in a process that I think is of benefit to all people.
Absolutely. And being able to really share in that experience and recognize that like many of us, myself, right? I'll just speak to myself, like I was ashamed of my anger. Anger was used as a way to shame me. Right? You are bad if you are angry. And I looked at the world that way too. I still to this day I'm working through it. Like I think of my father, right? He's a very angry man. And I think of him as a bad man.
Mm,
And I'm still working through that today. And I'm
yeah.
still trying to unpack that today so that I can work towards forgiving him while also working on myself and my own relationship with my anger and the allowance that I don't have to suppress my anger, that I can express it and that I can then talk with other people about it.
I think I'm listening to an audiobook right now that reminded me of this concept where I think we will all benefit, especially when it comes to anger, when we start to describe behavior, not people. So what I heard you say about your dad, and I think a lot of us can relate, oh, he was an angry, person, he was an angry drunk, he was an angry whatever, and so I think of him as a bad man. And for our own understanding of the emotion and the process and moving forward, like, well, what if he's not a bad man?
Right.
But what if his behaviors were bad?
Right. What about his behaviors didn't align with my values that that
Right.
I disagree with?
Right. And this then makes it more empowering because, oh, I saw exemplified behaviors I do not want to exhibit, engage in, offer
Perpetuate.
to others, perpetuate exactly. And so, but rather than, well, you're bad, I'm choosing, and then what am I choosing? Well, I know I don't want that. So what is the choice I will make? Oh, I want to be more patient. I want to be more compassionate, more understanding. I want to be more, whatever the thing is. And again, I keep coming back. So, like, why are we doing men's work and embodiment practice and shamanic work and yogic work? To do that, to create and cultivate the experience and the capacity within ourselves to be the person we want to be. Because it doesn't just happen. You don't decide, I'm I wasn't compassionate, but tomorrow I'm going to be, and then from then on. No, you have to practice compassion and practice empathy, and part of that practice is becoming curious about it and listening to other people's experience of it and letting that inform you, and I think this is in large part why, um, our elders are so important. Because a lot of this is, oh, through years and years and decades of experience, you have come to understand these things, and you might be able to offer me a bit of a shortcut. Now, if you think about the life, let's assume that we all live 80 years. And if an elder could give you a piece of advice that would get you to an understanding even 5 years sooner, that's kind of amazing.
And then you could pass it off to somebody else who could get it 5 years earlier than that.
Yeah, but so if I get an insight when I'm 46 right now, if I get an insight today that, from an elder that I trust that I would otherwise have to wait another 10 years and I can start living it now. And then I can so this is the benefit of having a community where we can share our experiences and then have them held and seen so that I think the important thing here is when you're the new one with the least amount of experience in this kind of work, your experience is heard and seen and held also. It isn't compared to that elder who's been doing this practice for 50 years and, is this calm elderly presence that we've seen. No, you get to say your thing too and then listen to all this other stuff.
And be able to bring in that beginner's experience as well. Like I think it's really beautiful to understand that like we can all learn something from each other. We can all learn something from each other's experiences to hopefully navigate this world with a little bit more ease, a little bit more joy, and uh, not not control, because I don't want to say like controlling emotions. 'Cause I don't believe emotions should be controlled. It's more like respected.
I don't think hmm, emotions being controlled. I think emotions can be understood. I think they can be collaborated with,
Yeah,
and I think they can be um, directed via consciousness
yeah,
in a
in
variety
a
of ways.
respectful way,
Yeah,
right?
so I think I like that idea of the word control not exactly right, because if we think about controlling them, then any moment when we have a big emotion, we may feel like we're failing to control them. So yeah, I'm in agreement with you. Emotions come and go.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, we don't have control over whether or not they show up. We have control over how we respond
Exactly.
to their showing up. In the same way that um, we get to respond to the weather. Oh, it's raining, and I can wear a raincoat or take an umbrella, or drive instead of bike, or whatever the thing is. But I can't stop the rain until it stops. So when we have anger, I'm experiencing anger. So now what do I like? What is my anger raincoat or
Yeah,
my anger umbrella? Because I can't just poof, anger
right,
is gone,
right.
but I can take some steps.
I can't say every day is going to be a sunny day, but I can definitely say I can be prepared for when it is a rainy day.
So sunny is happy and anger is rain. Like now let's go back to like, what is
Yeah,
sadness? Is it snow?
well, sadness, ice, yeah. So,
Okay,
I
I'm
did
just
I did
kidding.
have an opportunity to pull up Robert Frost's poem.
Oh,
Um,
yay.
so with that, just a quick little recap. We covered anger today, and anger is really powerful. Anger is really powerful and oftentimes misunderstood.
Mhm.
And I think that with today's conversation, we started to highlight that like we can build a relationship with our anger. We can acknowledge that underneath that anger is something else. And listening to what that something else might be and bringing curiosity to it can help us to make change in our own lives and in the world.
You and I have both been in circles. I have seen it happen so many times. Men will get into a chi generator, and we are asked to hold this pose, sometimes for 15 minutes, 20 minutes. I've heard 30
Bring
and
it on.
more. Yeah. I have seen anger, not just anger, but like fuel someone to keep going. It can be so powerful. But in that practice, we start to understand our nuanced experience of it and bringing that nuanced experience. So anger can be powerful. Anger can be consciously directed. Anger needs to be respected. Anger, I believe, needs to be discussed, especially when it's at its beginning stages, so that, oh, I'm starting to feel angry. And can we have an exploration before I am like out of control? And I think if we can start this practice, there's a lot of power to be had. And, this is a podcast for queer men and queer people. I think a lot of queer people have a lot of reason to be angry. Angry about what was expected of them, and, being forced to deny parts of their truth. And so, and I think we had that experience in a world where many of us were still not allowed to express it. So why do we need men's workspaces and queer men's workspaces for that purpose? And we saw it modeled yesterday and the day before in the circle. The men there needed it because it was a shared experience.
And thank you for bringing the container for us to have that shared experience, to be able to say, like, we're here to learn how to use anger as a tool of transformation rather than allowing it to be a destructive force, because it really can be.
And the reason I brought it, thank you for saying that. The reason I brought it was because I have been, in the last few weeks experiencing some anger of my own. I want to remind people as you're working with anger, that does not mean that it isn't uncomfortable.
Mhm.
I have been uncomfortable in the last few weeks and months, um, and I am grateful that I have tools and community to engage consciously with this emotion and the discomfort that comes with it. So I'd like to just say quickly thank you to everyone who's supported me through that process. And it is my hope now to be that support for other people. And then hopefully we create a network of people that we can all support each other.
Right. A bunch of steady oaks supporting each other, keeping each other's branches. Be like, "Hey, I got you today. Tomorrow you might have to get me," you know?
Is that rubbing the bark?
Yeah, no, 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 that's my little branch. My little branch
Oh,
coming out and saying like, "I got
oh,
you. I got you."
like little neurons.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah.
yeah.
Okay, well let's wrap this up with this poem.
All right, well,
Wait, I gotta laugh because I like your little branch. Yeah, okay.
Doot, doot, doot. All right, this is Fire and Ice by Robert Frost. Some say the world will end in fire. Some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if I had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to know that for destruction, ice is also great and would suffice. With that, I'm feeling very complete. How are you?
I also feel complete.
Will you take us out, please?
I will. Closing our eyes and connecting to our breath. It is with deep appreciation and gratitude for the shared space, for these insights and awarenesses that may have come, that we release the sacred container, wishing you all safety, community, brotherhood, and love. And with these words, our container is open but not broken. Aho.
Oh.